Hey guys, what is up? I'm actually going to do something pretty different today. I'm going to create a sort of a ranty video. I'm doing this because of some interactions I've had on Reddit lately. And when I find myself on Reddit, I find myself dealing with the same crummy arguments over and over and over. And I thought, you know what, it'd be really valuable to just make a quick video, put it in one place. I expect that for a lot of you, people who are friends of the channel, you'll probably have heard some of the arguments here and some of the discussion points, but I actually hope there's gonna be something here new for everybody. But at the same time, the primary focus of this video is to have a line in the sand, someplace where I've assembled all my thoughts in one place, where I've tried to deal with all the objections that I've heard and read. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I really want to talk about is disconnecting in Souls games. But in order to talk about that, I first have to talk somewhat about invasions. And I know plenty of folks like NIF and DangitJM have talked very directly about invasions. And those videos are really great. And I'm not going to try to say everything that they've already said because they've done it much better. And there's no sense in repeating it. But I do have a couple of perspectives that I think are somewhat unique and I haven't really heard people talk about before. So I want to start with those. The first point I wanted to make is in defending people that get angry about invasions. They tend to say things like, well, duh, it's called an invasion. You're invading my world. Of course I'm entitled to hate it. Of course I'm entitled to disconnect. Of course, etc. And the point I want to make, and I think it's a somewhat subtle point, but I think it's really, really important. I do not invade anybody, and neither do you. Your character role plays an invader who is invading another role-playing character. And that's a really important distinction, and maybe it doesn't sound like it, but think about it. If I called the police and told them that somebody shot me, and then I mentioned, well, no, it was in a video game in Call of Duty, we would very easily understand the distinction between a virtual character being shot at and being shot at for real. And similarly, I'm not actually invading anybody. That's an intended game mechanic, so it can't be an invasion in the literal sense that people mean that word. And they're trying to use the word invading to do some heavy lifting for them that frankly it really can't do. It's a role-playing invasion, not an actual invasion. So the next point up is around why people don't like invasions. And this is really important for some of the points I'm going to make in a minute. But I'm sure we've all seen the arguments about invasions. They're co-op interrupted. I don't want my time wasted. All sorts of reasons that people offer for not liking invasions and wishing that they'd go away. And first of all, I don't think there's any problem at all with somebody not liking a game mechanic. Like, I think that's totally fine. It's totally fine to not like invasions. It's totally fine to wish they weren't in the game. I just don't think it's right to take matters into your own hands and do things like disconnect from the game because you feel justified in your disdain for invasions. But what's really interesting to me is why I think people actually don't like invasions. And it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. I think people don't like losing. They don't like losing to other human beings. They don't like the idea of other human beings taking pleasure in their defeat. These people don't get angry about having to fight the same boss 10 to 15 times. They don't get angry about NPC invasions. They don't get angry about dying to the PvE. Their ire is reserved specifically for other human opponents. And I think there's a really deep lesson here about the dislike of loss. And we've all seen, especially newer players that'll run and jump off a cliff rather than die to a human opponent. And they'll take a certain death over even a small probability of victory. And at first it seems rather puzzling. Why would somebody do that? But I think it's pretty clear. They really hate losing to another player. Like, that is such a painful feeling for some people, and they will go out of their way to avoid it. And they especially dislike it when they're forced into a situation by the game to have combat with another player that may well be much more skilled than they are. That type of loss is something that's very hard for people to deal with. And in fact, I found some really interesting literature about this, and I want to talk about this for just a moment. Okay, so I found this really cool article. It was actually an autocross article dealing with competition in the racing world. And I want to talk specifically about the article, the point they make. And the article is actually entitled "The Psychology of Losing." The unbending truth is that a race has exactly one winner. Every other competitor loses, and depending on their expectations, each of them has to deal with varying degrees of the emotions that come with losing. A single loss can be hard enough to deal with, let alone a string of losses that shake our very ability to perform. No matter what the sport, every competitor hates losing, and for good reason. Besides the blow to the ego, losing actually hurts, not in an abstract way, but in a very real manner. It makes your stomach churn, changes your blood pressure, constricts thousands of muscles, impairs decision making, elevates stress, reduces testosterone, causes dopamine deprival, and much more. It's real, we've all felt it, and it's no fun. Your body wants to feel better. Your mind wants to prove its worth. Your ego wants to regain its self-image. There are real and measurable psychological and physiological effects. Losing quite literally feels really bad. Could not agree with this more. I think this is so fundamental, and I think any time that you're talking about invasions or really any kind of competition, you have to understand that this is really what's underpinning everyone's resistance to a mechanic like invasions. And in fact, it's why NIF has made the point that people love invasions when there's a 4v1 and they will chase you all over the map. They will avoid going through the boss fog and do everything in their power to chase you around because it's fun to win, and they know with a 4v1 the odds of them winning are quite high. But of course, as soon as their phantoms die and it's a 1v1, that same host will run scared straight to the boss fog. It's not about enjoying invasions or not enjoying invasions, it's about winning and losing. And that's totally fine. It's totally fine to hate losing. I just wish people would be a bit more forthright and say, I don't like invasions because I don't like losing. Okay, so now that I've got some of that framework out of the way around invasions, I want to get to the heart of this, which is really around disconnects. Anyone who invades knows disconnects are ever present. It's a real problem in invasions. But what's really shocking to me, even more so than the amount of times people disconnect, is that if you go on Reddit, it is not uncommon at all to see people actually defending and advising other players to disconnect. And disconnecting is straight up cheating. I mean, there's just no other way to describe it. And it amazes me not only that people defend and advise other players to disconnect, but they deny that it's cheating. And I think one point here first that I hear all the time is, hey, disconnecting, it's not that bad. And whether disconnecting is all that bad or not is really immaterial to whether it's cheating or not. Cheating is simply breaking the game's rules to gain an advantage, and disconnecting is certainly that. And I think some people are resistant to calling it cheating because they feel as if they call it cheating, then somehow they're conceding that the problem is even worse than they really think it is, that it has a worse impact. And while I do think it has a bad impact on the game, and I think that's sometimes hard for people to see who don't invade, I actually don't think whether it's bad and the extent to which it's bad actually has anything to do with whether or not it is cheating. Sometimes Redditors will say things to other people like, hey, you should disconnect in that situation, don't give the other guy the satisfaction. And when I see comments like that, I laugh because it really just gives the whole thing away. And it's obviously related to the psychology of losing that I talked about earlier, and it really has nothing to do with trying to avoid losing embers or anything like that. They simply don't want to see somebody else enjoy a victory at their expense, and that's why they come right out and say it. But of course, that defeats any sort of like principled objections that you could have to invasions in the video game. So another common objection that I encounter when I call out people as cheaters for disconnecting is that I'm taking the game too seriously. I'm taking things way too seriously. I mean, come on, man, it's just a disconnect. What's the big deal? And of course, you could easily flip that argument around and say, hey, it's just an ember. What's the big deal? So the whole idea of taking things too seriously doesn't really get you anywhere, and frankly is really an attempt to distract from the central issue of whether or not it's cheating. I mean, whether I take it too seriously or not has nothing to do with whether in fact it is cheating. And sure, I probably take this game too seriously sometimes. I mean, I have a YouTube channel about it. Clearly I take the game too seriously, but actually I don't get that exercised about people disconnecting anymore. What actually gets me worked up is the defending of it on Reddit and seeing people openly advising other people to disconnect. That's actually what gets me agitated. Another argument I encounter is people saying things like, well, it's my game. I can play the game the way that I want. And of course, to a large extent, that's true. But the issue here isn't whether you can play your game the way you want, it's whether you can cheat in a multiplayer game. Because of course, once the game is multiplayer, it's no longer just your game, it is our game. And the terms of use clearly call out behavior like this as being against the rules. So the fact that it's your game is really meaningless, any more than I could go into Call of Duty, give myself infinite health, and then just say, well, it's my game, so I'm entitled to play it the way I want. You're entitled to play games the way you want on your own, but as soon as it's a multiplayer game, you have to think about it being our game and no longer just your game. So there's actually a recent Reddit post that got me worked up about this all over again, and the author was actually making some really good points, and he was talking about the penalties for disconnects in this game and that they really kind of lack teeth, which is definitely true, and made some suggestions on how if he were a developer, if he had developed the game, how he might have approached the problem differently. And of course, Reddit being comprised of mostly PvEers, he got excoriated, totally predictable. I jumped into his defense. All my comments got downvoted, as I kind of expected that they would. But one of the things that's funny is when you talk about putting teeth into the disconnect penalty, a lot of people say, well, hey, disconnects, they're mostly on accident, which of course is completely false. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a good database. I really wish I did, where I could look at the percentage of disconnects that happen with an invader in your world, but I'm betting that it's over 95%. And sure, there's accidental disconnects, and sure, if we had a stiffer disconnect penalty, it would suck for the people that disconnected through no fault of their own. But you have to remember, if you have a bad internet connection, and even if you're helpless to fix it, if you don't want a disconnect penalty, you're saying that your right to enjoy the game trumps the fact that other people want to enjoy the game. It's a multiplayer game, so your enjoyment of the game in a case where you're disconnecting frequently, even by accident, is matched by somebody else's lack of enjoyment because you keep disconnecting from them. And I don't think that's the case. And by and large, most disconnects are preventable. So I think there's really no reason not to give a disconnect penalty stronger teeth. So I guess kind of in summary, I'd say we all understand people don't like invasions because they don't like losing. It's fine to not like losing. I don't like it either. It's one of the reasons actually I've been motivated to get better at the game, so I lose less often. Just be more transparent about your reasons for disliking the game. Don't blame it on things that have nothing to do with the game, and don't disconnect. And don't advise other people to disconnect. It's very clearly cheating, and this extends to Reds too. I have seen cases, albeit not as frequently as I do with hosts, of Reds straight up disconnecting when they get salty. Now, if you want to use the Black Crystal to, say, deny a host Estus, I think that's totally fair play, especially against a gank. Black Crystal is an item in the game. It's a supported concept. You're not cheating to do that. I think in some cases it might be a little cheesy. It really depends on the specifics of the situation, but cheesy or not, it definitely is not cheating. So Reds, don't make the problem worse. Don't disconnect. Don't give hosts the feeling like they're just doing the same thing. Help guilt them into stopping to disconnect. I mean, we've got a new game coming out. Who knows how soon Elden Ring's going to be out. It's a good bet that it's going to have an invasion mechanic. It's a really good bet that these same types of arguments are going to be brought to the fore over and over again, especially as new audiences are introduced to From Software games and the concepts of invasions and disconnects. I hope this helps, and I hope maybe this video can be helpful to people that are maybe trying to think through this issue, and I hope it can also be an antidote to people who justify cheating, who justify disconnecting, and maybe just haven't thought the issue through clearly enough. Thanks for listening.